This is Punishment by Stimulus presentation by Andrew Morgan. This is Special Ed 514. First, we'll look at what is punishment. Punishment is defined as when a response is followed immediately by a stimulus change that then decreases the future frequency of a similar response. A very common misconception, though, about punishment is that it's all about causing harm and it always is deemed as something bad. That is actually wrong. Not always the case. It's actually just all about teaching us about reinforcement and not repeating something that causes harm. Now the first comparison here is going to be about positive punishment versus negative punishment. Positive punishment is a stimulus that immediately is following a behavior which results in a decrease in frequency of a behavior. So it's kind of wordy, but the best way to kind of think about it is an example. So like if you're in class and your cell phone goes off and you get a lecture on why it isn't okay to have your phone on, then you would then stop bringing your phone. So it's kind of like thinking about it as like adding a negative consequence to a situation. Negative punishment is when you terminate of an already present stimulus immediately following a behavior that results in a decreased frequency of the behavior. So it's all about decreasing behavior or negative behavior. But with negative, you're removing something. So an example is students get in a fight over a toy, teacher takes away the toy. So it's just think of like a situation where you're taking away a desired item. Punishers. This is a stimulus change that immediately follows the occurrence of a behavior and thus reduces future frequency. So these are both kind of wordy definitions, but the examples kind of make it a little more clear. An unconditioned punisher is a stimulus which functions as a punishment without being paired with another punisher. So an example is just being in pain, maybe a body odor, physical restraint, whereas a conditioned punisher functions as a punishment as a result of a person's conditioned behavior. So saying the word no or a child's name out loud, they've been conditioned that like when they hear the words no or their name out loud, they should stop something. So it's a little more natural. Now, some factors that all go into influencing punishment. There's kind of four key topics that the book emphasizes. The first one is the immediacy, and that refers to just the longer the time delay between behavior is the less effective. So making sure that's immediate. Once the behavior happens, the punishment is immediately following it. Intensity/magnitude. Greater the magnitude of a punishing stimulus equals the more likely to suppress the occurrence of return. However, this is a little fluctuating. I'm going to kind of touch on this later as one of my thought-provoking questions. However, there is, of course, research that does show that the greater magnitude, the more likely to be beneficial. Schedule is also important. The effects of a punisher are maximized by a continuous schedule and a continuous punishment, which thus produces more stronger results than something that's intermittent. So intermittent can be effective in certain circumstances, but just making sure that most of the time the schedule of punishment is continuous and reliable. Reinforcement is also a very, very important factor. This is about just using punishment for undesirable target behaviors and utilizing reinforcers for alternative behaviors that are more desirable. So making sure you're using reinforcement with the target behavior as well as the alternative behavior. Side effects and problems with punishments. These are all about kind of negatives and problems that can happen. So punishment can evoke emotional and aggressive reactions. I'm sure we all know that. It can be a combination of some very aggressive responses. It can also cause escape and avoidance, such as students just not coming to school because of a consequence. I'm sure this has happened in many situations in your practice. Punishment can also cause problematic modeling. So a good example is just kind of like generations of physical abuse as punishers. Father to son to then his child. It's just more likely to carry over. Relying on negative reinforcement is problematic. So it says here reprimands can be negative in the sense that they might immediately extinct the behavior, but not for long term. It also mentions that teachers should use positive praise for desirable behaviors. So reprimands are actually both. I'm going to kind of show you the next slide. So positive punishments are also reprimands. So reprimands are kind of on both sides of the spectrum. Reprimands, though, that are positive forms of punishment would involve you kind of refrain from just saying no or stop, and use more of a one-on-one approach to the student in close proximity, and that's much more beneficial to using a reprimand. Response blocking, that's when you're actually physically intervening as soon as an individual displays a problematic behavior. So you want to use this with great care and really should be using prompts and redirections before you try response blocking as a form of punishment. Overcorrection, this is when a learner is required to engage in an effortful behavior. In my opinion, this is the most impactful when it's done and when the opportunities are there for it. So the first one is restitution. That's when a learner repairs a damage caused by the behavior and returns the environment to original and improved state. If they were to destroy or vandalize something, they would then have to clean it, make it look better than what they did before. Positive practice, the learner is required to perform the correct form of behavior over a duration of time. So kind of like a kid walks into the house with muddy feet, but then you're going to have them just practice wiping off their feet each time instead, over and over. Okay, guidelines for using punishment effectively. Kind of some 5 good clues that the book emphasizes here is to use punishment of good quality and magnitude. Deliver the punisher at the beginning of the behavioral sequence, so just making sure you punish as soon as it begins. Gradually shift schedule, so not just stay with a continuous, constant form of reinforcement and punishment, but then slowly wean off that and to use more of an intermittent schedule of randomness. Supplement punishment with other interventions, so making sure you're also reinforcing alternative behaviors and also doing things to adjust your antecedents that we've kind of learned a little bit in previous chapters as well. Be prepared for negative side effects is also a common rule of thought here. These can lead to an increased amount of undesirable behaviors, so you kind of got to maybe have some more severe behaviors before you finally get to what you are trying to accomplish with the child or with the person. Okay, ethical considerations. Treatments must be safe for everyone. Now, with restrictiveness, this also must be examined because you don't want to create a method of punishment that's going to restrict their life, their independence, their daily activities. That's what you want to stay away from. So you want to make sure you examine what you're doing and if you are really doing more harm than good, because the goal is to always make sure they're in the least restrictive environment. Also, the right to effective treatments, making sure you're using best practice approaches, differential reinforcements, and just positive reductive approaches as well. And be aware of punishment policy and procedural safeguards, making sure you consult with your local, state, and federal policies because punishments can get you into trouble and you don't want to risk anything bad down the road if something does go wrong. So making sure you're kind of aware of what the policies are before you fully implement it. Okay, questions to ponder. The first I'm going to ask you is, why is it so vital to use a variety of reinforcements as well as to reinforce the alternative behaviors? This is something that they kind of touched on in the book, but it's kind of also good to just reflect on in your own practice as to what really is the reason behind they want to have a variety of reinforcements. And also the alternative behavior. Why do you need to go ahead and reinforce that? Why is it so important? Number 2, this is one thing that kind of jumped out to me as I was reading. Why do you think there's such an inconsistent research on the benefits of intensity and magnitude on punishment? So I mentioned magnitude a lot, or at least a few times in the presentation, but they did also in some parts of the book say that the research is still ongoing and nothing really is for sure. So maybe you could think about why. Why would there be inconsistent research regarding magnitude/intensity? And then number 3, why do you think reprimands are deemed as being both positive and problematic forms of punishment? So what are kind of the both ends of the spectrum in regards to reprimands? Thinking of maybe situations from your own practice where reprimands were used well and where they were used poorly. Okay? And then the references is the textbook that we have, and that is all. Thank you.